I will begin with a fable, what Derrida calls a true fiction. Like quite a number of fables, this one concerns origins. Not everyone is aware of my provenance, where I come from, so let me unroll full disclosure at this time. It all began more or less as a secret rendezvous, but secret only in the sense of an open secret, like the purloined letter or the illicit affair between Anna Karenina and Count Vronsky, hidden in full view of an entire society. What I have to say is both widely known and yet remains concealed. Deconstruction and hermeneutics had a brief affair. This affair clocked in as a one-night stand and appeared to fizzle abruptly, unable to carry through the terms of relationship. Hence the phrasing that has puzzled many a philologist, il n'y a pas de rapport. Tightly bound to this il n'y a pas, a girl was issued. We're not sure it was a girl, but that's another story. And since she sprang forth from this il n'y a pas of hermeneutics and deconstruction, her human instabilities are in full swing from the start. Let us say simply that a girl was conceived in this one-night stand and that she migrated, truth be told, she was banished to the US. Coming from a very strict father, an expansive, often seemingly playful but melancholic mother, the girl grew up to be, for the most part, a troublemaker. When people saw her coming down the street, they wondered what kind of troubleshooting expedition she was on and whether she would take aim at them. That was not her style, however. Friendly and warm-hearted, shaky on boundaries, she nearly never aimed at persons, but simply liked to create disorder, promoting upheaval in the most serene neighborhoods of thought. That was, in a nutshell, her heritage. She never attacked persons, but went after what her aunt Kierkegaard called the generality. Her Oma, Friedrich Schlegel, often chided our girl for her promiscuity, but understood, though it was never a matter of merely understanding. Since Oma Schlegel had written über die Unverständlichkeit, the famous work on unintelligibility. But in any case, her Oma understood that she couldn't help it if she always got pregnant with the ideas of another. She was brought up in America by her Tante Nietzsche, who had emigrated to the land of actors, free to change roles, invent genealogies, and jump temporalities, according to the habits that her cousin Freud, who was not exactly on speaking terms with Tante Nietzsche, but knew exactly what she was up to, even if my cousin Freud had come to an idea first, according to his meticulously kept records. Well, they were in disagreement about so much on which they agreed upon, and practiced the narcissism of small differences on matters concerning my upbringing. Anyway, my cousin Freud also had a thing for America, especially for the phenomenon of the American flirt, which I embodied. This little girl could switch thousands of channels, loving every one of them, and was capable of reinventing cathexes on a daily basis. My cousin Freud learned so much from me. Do you really think he could have recognized hysteria or obsessional neurosis without my modeling agency? Who do you think showed him how to move beyond the pleasure principle? Except for one minor detail. I did not consider pleasure reducible to a principle. All thanks are due to me. Well, enough of the customary academic gesture of self-presentation. Enough about me and my kinship network, which I have just exposed too readily, maybe blocking some of the surprise channels that also command the particulars of my very personal archives. By today, things have changed. I have changed. The child parts have been taken in hand. The head of the household expects, Hölderlin style, a level of sobriety. Philippe Lacoulabat has emphasized sacred sobriety and taking on Heidegger's engagement with technology. Following his lead, I devoted myself to the analysis of the technologically inflected state, the intensity of which I situated in the Third Reich, when technology was dealt in to the mythological inscriptions of the state. In this weighty context, I proceeded by synecdoche and metonymy in order to isolate the technological takeover. I explored telephonic flashes of connectedness, underscoring the mythic dimensions of instantaneity and related myths of unmediated power surges. My attention then turned to the national investment in TV after World War II, where transgenocidal rage was channeled into endless crime and police stories that covered the unsayable, allowing TV as a blind witness, a neutral gleam, to absorb the historical shock and to diffuse the interruption of an unassimilable history. An unassimilable history. An unassimilable history. With the advent of broadcast networks and their compulsive topoi, corpses henceforth could be massively produced within thematizable segments, aligning dead bodies that TV learned to show without having to mourn. Yes, TV was henceforth able to produce corpses that did not need to be mourned. The bodies kept coming on endless repeat, rerunning through a history that could not be mastered, but needed constantly to switch to allegorical channels. I saw in this phenomenon an ethical hiatus. Media technology took over the role of counting the unmournable losses. In a sense, the telephone was traded in historically for TV. And it was traded in for the TV as the media technological plug, and one transferential system for another. One's ears during the war had been trained on the alternating broadcasts of Wagner and the Führer. This switchover to TV carries with it an entire politics, as well as an entire rhetoric of drugs. The ear was addicted. Now the eyes transfixed by a neutral gleam. The question of ethical limits arises not only within a spectrum of technological choices, but opens the dossier on the deconstitution of the subject and tries to account for the debilitated subject, the technologically wasted, vegetative state of consciousness, nearly extinguished, half alert. With television, one raises the question, linked closely to traumatic erasure. Are we responsible for what we watch? Or almost watch? What does it mean to watch and other states of awakening or alert in the age of technology, ranging from binoculars to bifocals to visors, to the microscopic gaze, to state surveillance, or even to watching one's weight or watching your friend's back? Perhaps the point I would wish to urge no longer concerns the possibility of inventing disorders, as it was for so many years. The turn toward media technology, already signaled in Plato, but refitted to our needs and pathologies only recently, was a way of undermining the ruling legitimacies with which we were faced. It allowed us to scramble the master codes, attack the sovereignty of the book, and desecrate, where necessary, pernicious grammars of authority. It was our way of hacking in full view of disbelieving witnesses into the institution and reconfiguring the future of the archive. We conducted guerrilla raids, some of us, on the cognitive regimens that oppressed us, dumbing us down, we feared, by the day, by the lecture, by the conference minutes. And so we entered a danger zone, eroding files, interrupting complacencies, immunizing the world from oppressive traditions involving knowledge storage and diffusion, and somehow even shaking up the prerogatives of sexual difference. Though, undeniably, studies in the neighborhood of technology still, in some cases, brandish masculinist idols, by which I mean to indicate the survival and habits of gender assignments, including with the Turing test, even as the advent of genderless, or rather gender-free, like caffeine-free configurations, had begun to assert themselves. In one of my reflections, I have wondered why there are so many cowboys in suburbia. But that's another story, requiring another access code. Let us continue with today's conversation and anamnesis. The technomania of recent decades is perhaps drawing to a close as we are called upon to offer a sober reflection of where we have been, riding the inexorable wave of the technological incursion, what we've missed or miscalculated, our history of hyperbolic hopes and overextended tropes, but also of tremendous creativity, insight, and political insistence. My home ground was Germanistic, which propelled me to the French side of things, or more appropriately, to the French appropriation of German thought. Forming gangs, though not so often tight as thieves, we drew up new maps and claimed territories that to some extent still hold today, though often disavowed or partially effaced. We do not sail under our own flag in the chronicles of the culture wars. Nonetheless, the media technological territories that we farmed, but also forced onto academic itineraries and new curricula, were hospitable to and nurtured dissident energies, fugitive economies, and the beginnings of that monstrous aggregate that never quite works, interdisciplinary studies. Despite its inbuilt flaws, media technology, owing to its distinct mappings, has allowed for a sustained, if often secluded, powwow among the transdisciplines of science, medicine, literature, economics, philosophy, legal studies, cinema and film studies, architecture, psychoanalysis, if only too rarely psychoanalysis. Media technology was the off-ramp that many of us took to get a breather from the monumental monotony of the main highway of university transmission systems. And for some of us, this detour was an existential necessity. as well as a matter of intellectual probity. Who could tolerate another recap of Goethe's dependency on Charlotte von Stein, or the real story behind Werther's Leiden, or Amelia's wrong turn and how she landed on Werther's suicide desktop? The positive details for which normal, straight, and boring Wissenschaft or scholarship was responsible, though it never went there, preferring instead to clean up Goethe's act and Lessing's deviancy. We couldn't take it anymore, some of us, so we split. Still, there were custody battles. We were, some of us, not about to renounce Werther or any of the children soaked with tears, blood-drenched, gender-fragile, our children of German literature. They had to come along for the ride if they were to be sprung from the aura-sapping deadly zones of regulated scholarship. So we thought, some of us. My only complaint about this splintered off area of the culture wars is that too often the ghosts were crowded out and left behind. Along with the growing population of ghosts left to their invisible stalks in the dark and back rooms of the new technological emergence, theory which is the undecidable limit between literature and philosophy, was left more or less in the dust, tossed out, more or less abandoned. By this I mean that in my view, and don't forget that I wear night goggles, so I take the insomniac view and stay up at night waiting for my ghosts. There it goes, Horatio. Thou art a scholar, speak to it. In my unblinking view, media technology has in part wanted to demagnetize its field of vision or inquiry, clear the static, obliterate the parasite, mute the phantom, acts or aggressive passivities that amount to a betrayal and forgetting of its own history, which cannot be dissociated from any history of phantoms, no matter how improbable or difficult it remains to call up such an immaterial group of stalkers, whether they belong to the dead or undead colleagues of medial invention. Media technology, to a significant degree, has turned away from the very odd literature in which it originated. There would be no media technology without the invisible channel of ghostly visitations by which it is to this day tuned. The phantomal submission is not necessarily thematizable, I'll give you that, but a history of the spectral invasion, as Larry and very few others have shown, belongs to any presentation of technological pervasiveness. Excuse me. I don't know why I'm getting so worked up over this possible lacuna in contemporary studies, invoking nearly moralistic tonalities, which is not my style. Wait, correction, it is my style. I have an awful tendency to dozier about and stir and perturb the more polite protocols to whose capaciousness I aspire when reflecting on general trends and tendencies in our shared fields of study. I apologize. This hammering, this relentless making of a point, is not only a characteristic infirmity of scholarly speech, but in this case comes, I imagine, from the habits of the detective agency for which I work. We track down the truth, that is, indissociably, the crime that started it all. We hunt down Oedipal tracts, genealogical purges, affinities, exclusionary operations, falsifications, metaphysical incidents, hermeneutic facades, and weak horizons in the most remote regions of thought. Not so long ago, we outsourced some of our work to Husserl, Popper, Carnap, and Derrida, and Reinberger, and Schirmacher. Fellows who in some cases didn't even know that they were recruited to play a significant role in our team's findings. They may not know they belong to an affiliate squad, but they each have a registration number. The search was prompted by Nietzsche, who nailed our technological age in terms of the experimental disposition that he uncovered in it. We were looking into the scientificity of science in the Nietzschean vocabulary and the ends of man. Speaking of the ends of man, speaking of Nietzsche's gay science, no, I'll get to that later. I mean the case linking Derrida to the lesbian avenger, Valerie Solanas, who wrote the underground bestseller even though she couldn't sell it, had no distributor or publishing house. She wrote, as you know, the Scum Manifesto with a philosophical and scientific fervor. She relied on technology to bring about her one-warrior American loser type of revolution with no real followers or follow-through, though she did shoot Andy Warhol. And I'll get to that indefensible misfiring shortly. No, wait, we'll get to it now. Otherwise, I'll shred and lose it. For our purposes here, I must be brief and content myself with switching on the metonymic incubator and allegorical machine. For my part, I was led in some to consider extreme and indefensible revolutionary movements or impasses that explicitly depend on technological models, projections, dream pumps. For instance, Valerie Solanas and her Scum Manifesto, now, as said, a cult text with an underground fan base, relied on the essence of technology to do her job for her, namely to destroy the classical unity of the anthropos and decimate man as figure and substance. Technological mutation, she surmised, would do the revolutionary job if only she could practice patience and subdue agency, which she could not, as we know from the shots taken at Warhol and other unsavory acts aimed at great art, the figure of man. Why she chose Warhol, the white zombie, to serve as an emblem of man is another question. I suggest, after numerous detours and motivated returns, that she was targeting the name, Andy, androphobically, not to mention Warhol. I just lost that. So the point that I make in that text is that she was aiming at the signifier, the drawing cards, which I must now leave out of the picture. Yes, we are still within the folds of media technology, but let us freeze frame this segment retaining only this much. Though she notoriously packs style in the mode of derangement, loading up on anger and furious rounds of righteousness, Solanas also carries theoretical issues to their assigned limits. This was not necessarily her intention or wish to score theoretical points, but alongside her stubborn destitution and injured denunciations, Valerie manages to pick off the crucial themes associated with the dominion of the technological, announcing that what we have understood philosophically as man is currently under scientific erasure, an archaic memory trace of our techno-modernity. Where were we? Asks the scholar. Speak to it, Horatio, for thou art a scholar. Like Benjamin's police force, technology is everywhere, even where it is not, even when you think you are not being bugged. I see technology strongly at work in Hamlet. There is the standoff in Hamlet between modalities of memory, what Hegel distinguished as the split between Gedächtnis and Erinnerung, with Erinnerung, and you can hear the inner movement of that memory, taking the honors of being linked to interiorizing memory, the heart's holding space. And Gedächtnis trailing behind as the more mechanical type of memory, that which needs or relies upon a teleprompter, a Memorex device, or the instrumentality of a tool. Derrida develops the implications of the Hegelian distinction in his memoir for Paul de Man, when it is a matter of being able to tell a story from memory, commemorating the departed other. In Hamlet, the dissociation between Gedächtnis and Erinnerung occurs fatefully when the paternal specter asks, tells, commands, petitions, please. It's not clear which, or what kind of speech act we're faced with here. In any case, the ghost of Hamlet Sr. says, remember me. So this is a scandal when the ghost says, remember me, and now I'm echoing some of what Larry said, but let me go with it and think about it, because it made me think about what happens in Hamlet, why it's a scandal. And we can skip the part of the remember me could be asking to reinstitute or reconstitute the phallus, remember me, remember, that you already understood. But I wanted to point out the technological maneuver that Hamlet scandalously engages when the ghost tells him the story. At that moment, unless anyone knows it and wants to tell us, at that moment, according to the convention of vengeance drama, Hamlet should be whipping out his sword and promising to avenge his father. I think you all may remember this. But what does Hamlet do instead? He whips out a pad and pen. So the father had just told him the scandalous truth of his murder. And Hamlet goes, okay, I won't forget this. Now, what was that again? Could you tell me again? Could you refresh my memory? I promise not to forget. So he treats it like a post-it that you're going to put on the fridge. And you can see that this is an absolute scandal in terms of the rupture in any kind of codification of dramatic tension. But the switch over that Shakespeare insists upon to a kind of iPad relationship to the maternal at this point. So, remember me. Hamlet's misstep can be traced back to the moment he chooses technology in order to remember, memorize, recollect, recall the father, prompting an immemorial scene of the slaying of the father at the very moment he wants his murder avenged. I cannot get into this here, though so much urges me in the direction we are pointed to when technology supplants the father and the fiction of paternity from Plato's Pharmacy, Derrida's important text, to the Wizard of Oz and its many beyonds, where the destruction of the paternal by the technological incursion gets asserted with crucial consequence in a little girl's path. All this to say, at this juncture, that we still have to contend with the victory of patriarchy and the many complex inscriptions of the technological, which comes down on both and still other ever transgendering sides, if sides can still be drawn on this matter. My own trajectory, I say own with great irony and dozens of quotation marks. In the age of the technological disclosure, one cannot seriously claim one's own work as if it were not grafted, spliced, contaminated, prosthetically fitted, hybridized. You get the drift. One cannot say one's own work. One cannot say one's own work as if my teachers and friends were not telling me what to do or say, or conversely trying to trip me up, and as if I were in any case not ceaselessly hacking into their thoughts and projects, though Bataille has taught us to get rid of the very concept of projects. As if I were not myself, if you will provisionally permit me this 18th century prosthesis of self itself. As if I were not myself monitoring their every move, even unconscious flickers of thought, and registering nearly infinite sparks and stimuli. Having said this, but it by no means suffices to disclaim the by now repellent and absurd syntag of my own work, or even more aggravating, my own thought, which my students don't hesitate to hurl at me as a kind of objection to a philosophy I might be attempting to unpack with the care of one diffusing a bomb. And then it all blows up anyway when a youngster pipes up precipitously with his own point of view on the matter, or her own thinking. Much of this insolence isn't merely a sign of bad upbringing or poor manners, but is directly linkable to technological promiscuity and the self-assurance that this new register of being has promoted. This demi-rant, aimed provisionally at the phantom student body, not you. This mechanism of displacement was in any case brought on by the utterance my own work, whose meaning I tried to show has been irreversibly altered by all sorts of static interference, editing devices, originary deprocreation. And then what I think happened is that I accidentally clicked into the as yet unread dossier of everything and everyone that interferes with my writing. Not you. Which is not the same as what I had hoped to uncover in the syntag of my own work, of which I am infinitely dispossessed and frankly never have had any hankering for. A communitarian in spirit, I prefer bands and bandits, ensembles, aggregates, the shared space of the atelier, gangs, cliques that don't stick, conference calls, retreats, spectral colloquies, the occasional one-on-ones. To reassure myself, I want to turn over at least part of this discussion and pass the mic, as I am more than happy to do, to the reflections of Derrida on depaperization, on the way paper and signature haunts technology and disturbs the predicament of the sans-papier, those worldwide aliens, so-called illegal aliens, bereft of paper documents, the fate of the undocumented squatting on the peripheries of law, and the technological complicity that I see in decreating world and front-loading the penitentiary culture that in the US grows like the wasteland grows and switches into different, if still subterranean, expressions of being. Being confined is one modality of the technological disclosure and closure, but given its insistent articulation, it is not always a seat of unpleasure. Something draws us to solitary confinement, as Freud once warned apropos of Dostoevsky. Something craves the lockdown, the desire-quenching drive mutely installed as the death drive, which finds its home in the can. Penitentiary culture, though prevalent and the only thing besides oil companies not in recession, is not limited to the US, but can be detected or nearly detected anywhere, also close to the Zurich airport. But depaperization also involves the fluctuating meaning of paper money in relation to the gold standard, and I thought too that Faust too, as well as Schlegel, should be brought into the discussion, my Oma, of the devaluation of the dollar in terms of their speculations, very precise, on monetary valuations and the flow of capital translated into the paper dispersal that would place bets on and proliferate all sorts of calculable considerations according to a, according to a persistent algorithm of the incalculable. Perhaps open a discussion on the libidinal economy as drawn up by Goethe and relayed to Lyotard, something that could be put in touch with the technologies of a worldwide economy and attendant globalized factors. The problem is, and I think I've been demonstrating this point, that trained by highly determined philosophical detection systems and capable of seeing technology everywhere, I see technology even in media technology. And I see it installed in the body with a post-Schreberian. By the way, you can treat me like a TV and pause me and ask me what this means. Post-Schreberian fervor, but with a different GPS. I see them installed in media texts that pump desire, design fractal interiorities, as in the case of drugs, which often respond to receptors already placed in the body as if nanotechnologically calling out for them. The topos, and now I'm going to try to wrap it up, that I would have liked to consider at length tonight involves finally surveillance. That's what I've been building up to. Its function as the media technological advisory board to the contemporary state, national, transnational, non-national, the state on its own watch, the suspended, militarized, ubiquitous, ever-dying state, its own open-air theater. Ever since Hobbes mentioned security as that which compels human beings to come together out of fear, the regime of security, from the security blanket to military assertions of urgent need, holds sway over us unlike any other statement of political purpose. There are artists who have recently insisted with exemplary prescience on articulating the premises of such a political mutation. Among them is Julia Scher, a former security guard and performance artist. While Agamben, our friend, has argued that the shift to the security state is irreconcilable with democracy, Scher, also relentlessly critical of the security tropes around which her thought is organized, offers an even more disturbing view. She, in effect, meshes the deadly zones of security measures with the pervasive yet hidden problem of technological seduction. Hers is a site of acute political sensibility that remains open to infiltrations, psychic leakage, and unaccountable contaminations. Alongside the sinister crackdowns of state, she locates life forms of SM wish fulfillment, entering a hypothesis of a Schreber-esque reception system that uniquely welcomes the invisibly penetrating rays of high technology. Her insight does not stop at the intrusive probes of the security state or traumatic arrests of the electronic capture, but explores the secret complicities, the unavowable concessions made to invasive control. She posits the nearly post-human body as that which blossoms open to the pulse of technological encroachment, as that which thrives on the intrusive threat and offers itself as test site for new transparencies. The bag and the body lean forward to receive the penetrating probes of a deceptively benevolent form of social engineering. The intrusive maneuvers of thoroughgoing inspection parallel the sexual instruction and are filtered on the whole, by a reassuring idiom. Thus, the titles of her installations, Hardly Feel It Going In, and I'll Be Gentle. Unlike political theorists, including Agamben or even Foucault, Cher is not shy about considering the fatal pleasure calls of the otherwise neutralized, globalized, and invading state of security. She reflects that which tracks and attracts, and offers us a way to read those who get off on being watched and punished, those who thrill to the inexorability of being caught on tape. In other words, Julia Cher stands alone as guard and guardian of an unstated perspective of what has befallen us. She uniquely has an angle on the future of the security state, which takes into account the psychoanalytic predictions of a masochistic politics, something that might account for an unprecedented docility on the part of a highly technologized body politic. Such work as Cher's, in effect, exposes a politics of submission that no longer belongs to any recognizable lexicon of oppression, poverty, or class determination. It discovers and marks another epoch of submission that flies beneath the radar of traditional theoretical protocols of political understanding. To be sure, Cher is clear about the murderous consequences of carrying out dubious police action in the name of security. She understands the regime of new teletopies, the disruption of political sites, and the consistently morphing configurations of electronic disturbance. Yet she leaves room for a study of scoptophilia, sexuality and surveillance, the seduction of cooing female voices, the phallic penetration of the ear, the punctual thrills of data harvesting, the singular abandon of batch recording, and the low-tech matter of commonly accessorized uniforms. There's nothing simplistic about Julia Cher's vision, nor does she revert to a peculiar brand of Deleuzian machismo fueled by legendary desiring machines. Instead, Julia Cher registers a different level of visual dissidence, prompting a minor insurrection each time she mobilizes the viewing body as part of the totality of her work. The viewer, citizen, is fed into the installation by a field that mimes what can be seen as the municipal clinical gaze, disrupting the ruling metaphors of autonomy and integrity of self itself. The viewer body submits to the calculative traversals associated with technology. A body probed, analyzed, sectioned, and scanned, measured and standardized by the pressures of the technological grid. The viewers fail to reappropriate themselves by means of a solidifying image, but see a representation gliding through the monitors, vaguely dislocating their whereabouts and furtive gestural expression. Unaccountably, one has opened an account with a bank of monitors. Like technology itself, video surveillance is henceforth irremissible. It is always on you, trained on you, as part of the unbroken quotation of a certain grasp of reality. It is not as though one could turn away from technology at will or zone its incursions to a circumscribed space, a comfortably sealed elsewhere. Ever probing, the security technology intensifies the body's sense of exposure, illuminating while denying its absolute fragility. And so, we've come around to watch each other here to urge vigilance and sensitivity, and above all, right now, a rap. Let us continue the work of disinscribing the art and language of today's security state. Congratulations to all the graduates and all of you who have made it to be sitting up right here. Let us understand that, like a woman's work, our work is never done, that we must take endless blows, allowing ourselves to get stabbed by the winds of an unknowable futurity, returning evermore to sender as we antagonistically confront what must be dismantled. Thank you.